Welcome on in for today's video. We're going to fill out a hypothetical 2020 electoral college map between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. As you can see, I've already filled out a number of states here. These are the ones that I find safe for Biden or Trump and don't warrant as much of a discussion. That puts us into a situation where we're at 190 electoral votes for Biden and 106 for Donald Trump, but still 242 electoral votes up for grabs. And I want to talk about these states in particular in a bit more detail. Now, before going through and filling out these states in this Biden-Trump matchup, just to do a bit of a discussion on Biden's candidacy. Now, in the Democratic primary, we're in a situation where it feels like there's only three candidates that have a serious shot at going on and winning the nomination. That would be Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and Joe Biden. And I think there are some strengths to a Biden candidacy, but also some weaknesses, and I just want to touch on those real quick. So the weaknesses would be not having as much voter enthusiasm among younger voters or just the progressive leaning voters in the Democratic Party. This was a problem that Clinton had, for instance, back in 2016, where it wasn't obviously as much of an issue for Obama in 2012 and 2008, where he was able to generate that enthusiasm among that particular voter bloc. It made a huge difference in Obama winning in rather significant margins, where Hillary Clinton came up short in her matchup against Donald Trump, but also just trying to turn out unlikely voters, which is more of the Bernie Sanders strategy. I think those are areas of weaknesses potentially for Joe Biden. Now, the areas of strength that I find for him is he tends to do quite a bit better among older voters. This is a more consistent voter demographic, and there's a lot of older centrist or center-right voters who maybe have a bit of a distaste for a Joe Biden, where they could perhaps palate voting for Joe Biden in relation to more progressive Democrats like an Elizabeth Warren or a Bernie Sanders. And I think that that's where Joe Biden could perhaps find some more strength. We'll see if that is the case or not. Based on what the polls are saying, particularly among these three Democrats in their head-to-head in a lot of these competitive states against Donald Trump, Biden tends to do just a little bit better, although it's not the case across the board. And all three candidates have a pretty strong case to be made that they would have electoral success against Donald Trump. But based on what the polls are saying, there's definitely a case to be made based on that data that Biden would be a pretty strong opponent to Donald Trump. That could whittle away, however, if Biden goes on and wins the nomination, because he isn't necessarily the greatest campaigner or debater. So we would see how that would maybe change things in the polls or not, but we'd still be a long way from that. And then, of course, Biden would have to win the nomination to for us to get that particular information. But at this point in time, it looks like a Biden candidacy would be a tough opponent to Donald Trump based on what we're seeing, especially in a lot of these battleground states. So to start things off, I'm going to go out west. The Southwest is where the Democrats have made gains quite a bit over the past decade or so, and it feels like that's only going to continue going forward. Particularly, it's a demographic advantage for them in these areas. And we're in a situation where I feel like all of these top three Democratic candidates are going to do at least as well as Clinton did. So states that Clinton won in 2016 definitely going to be giving over to Joe Biden. So that starts with Nevada, where Clinton was able to win the state, and then the Democrats did very well in the midterms, winning the Senate seat statewide as well as the governorship. And we feel like this would be a relatively likely result for Joe Biden to pick that one up. Moving down to Arizona. Now, this is where I think a Biden candidacy could be a little bit stronger, perhaps, than maybe a Sanders or a Warren. And that's a state like Arizona. There's a lot of older age voters in this state and a lot of center moderates that are obviously in the populous areas of the state of Arizona, where I feel like Biden could have quite a bit of success in a state like this. And then also just with the demographics continuing to get better and better for the Democrats. And they could also pick up another Senate seat here in the state of Arizona in 2020 like they did back in 2018. I think that would be a pretty solid result possibly for Biden to pick up. And then Colorado, another one of these southwestern states that's been trending well towards the Democrats. We saw Hillary Clinton pick up the state. We would expect Joe Biden to do the same. Moving up to Montana, this is one that I'm going to put as likely towards President Trump. Now, on occasion, depending on the election cycle in presidential years, at times we've seen this be a close state. That was not the case in 2016, where Trump absolutely dominated Clinton. But we've also seen Democrats able to win statewide there, like the governorship, as well as obviously the Senate seat in 2018, with John Tester continuing to retain that one. So, and when we're looking at this pocket of the country, some of these states obviously a bit more right-leaning than what you can get out of the state of Montana, which can possibly be a bit more interesting based on the situation. Now, going down to Kansas, we saw statewide in 2018, the governorship went over to the Democrats, and we could possibly see a competitive 2020 Senate race, especially if it's Chris Kobach, for instance, on the Republican side. And then we see that Trump, his numbers aren't all that great in terms of his approval-disapproval in Kansas. When we look at these Great Plains states, this is one of the results that I think could at least be a bit more interesting, but still going to be putting this one as likely towards Trump, as this is still a pretty consistent result that we see in presidential years. That statewide presidential vote tends to go towards the Republicans no matter who the candidate ends up being. Now, Texas, in this southwestern region that's trending towards the Democrats, it feels like sometime over the next decade, this is going to become a clear toss-up scenario. I still think it's a bit more lean towards the Republicans than that toss-up situation. Now, we saw Beto O'Rourke very competitive in his statewide matchup against Ted Cruz in 2018 for that Senate race. We'll see how that carries over into 2020, where there could possibly be another competitive Senate race, and then also, of course, the presidency. We've seen some very interesting polls where on a number of occasions these Democratic hopefuls, the upper-tier Democratic candidates, have even shown neck and neck with Trump or even a slight lead. We'll see if that is the case or not, but still going to be giving this one as just a slight lean over to Donald Trump. He was able to, of course, win the state by larger single digits over Hillary Clinton back in 2016. And then Missouri, one of these Midwestern states that's actually been trending more towards the Republicans in recent cycles. They had Claire McCaskill, the Democratic senator. She obviously lost her race in 2018. Trump did extremely well in Missouri in 2016 against Hillary Clinton. I think Biden is a little bit tougher of an opponent for Trump in a state like Missouri, but still at the end of the day, going to be giving that one as a likely over to Donald Trump. And now we get into these key Midwestern states. This is where I think Biden can do a bit better than what Hillary Clinton showed back in 2016, starting with Iowa. Now, I think the Democrats can actually have quite a bit of success in this state, not just because of the tariffs that are having a negative impact on the farming community in Iowa, and there's a lot of blame for Donald Trump in that instance. Based on the most recent approval-disapproval numbers state by state, Trump actually has a worse approval rating in Iowa than he does in states like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. So that's in and of itself not a great sign for the Republicans. But just on top of that, the fact that this is the first state that we have in primary caucus season, the Democrats are spending a ton of time in the state spreading that message. That can have a carryover effect no matter who the nominee ends up being. There's also likely to be a very competitive Senate race in the state that the Democrats could possibly pick up. And we feel like Biden could just have a slight lean over Donald Trump in picking this one up. Minnesota feels like a pretty safe one. Going to be giving it as a likely. You could even make a case that it would be solid for Joe Biden. Clinton was extremely competitive with Trump in the state, but there's not a whole lot of love in the state of Minnesota for Hillary Clinton. She got absolutely demolished in primary season in her head-to-head against Bernie Sanders in the state, for instance. But there's also not necessarily a lot of love for Trump either. Trump also didn't have any success in the state, really, when we look back at that 2016 primary season. And this is a state that's been trending well for the Democrats. We saw in the 2018 midterms, they won the Senate special election as well as just the regular Senate election with Klobuchar. On top of that, absolutely dominating statewide, also the governorship statewide. And really just these statewide races for the Democrats were extremely strong in the state of Minnesota in 2018. You'd expect Biden to have a bit of success there. Now we get into these key states. Wisconsin, we saw the Democrats have success here in 2018, winning the Senate election and flipping the governorship statewide. It feels like this one's primed for the Democrats to pick up presidentially. And just going back through history, this tends to be more of a Democratic-leaning situation in presidential elections. That flipped, obviously, in 2016, but based on what we've been seeing in that 2018 bounce back for the Democrats and what the polls are indicating, it feels like Biden would be able to claim that one, as well as the state of Michigan, a similar case, and Pennsylvania on top of that. So these three key states that Trump won by less than 1 percentage point over Hillary Clinton, or right around that number, it's a situation in the 2018 midterms where the Democrats had quite a bit of success in all three of these statewide Senate races, as well as governorships, winning all of those. And it feels like that these states are primed to go back towards the Democrats possibly in 2020. Now, I think Ohio could be really interesting. We've seen polls coming out of the state that show a situation where these upper-tier Democratic hopefuls have a chance at picking this one back. Now, Trump had a ton of success in the state against Hillary Clinton, a very weak candidate that the Democrats ran in, especially a Midwestern Rust Belt state like this, and that was the Achilles heel for the Democrats in 2016, where they underperformed in these Midwestern states, and that was the difference maker. I think Biden can possibly go on and win the state, and we've seen that in the polls that he has a decent strength in Ohio against Donald Trump, but Trump did so well in this state. It's really hard for me to completely flip this one back over, and it also is one of these Midwestern states that's been trending a bit more towards the Republicans in recent election cycles. Now, in the 2018 midterms, the Republicans retained the governorship, but then they had a incumbent Democratic senator, of course, in Sherrod Brown, that was able to win that one. If you're a strong Union Democrat, you can have a lot of success in the state, so maybe that's where Biden has enough success to pull this one off, but still just going to be giving this one as a slight lean over to Trump. However, I feel like I could make a strong case either way to go between Biden or Trump in a state like Ohio. And then going to Virginia, this is a state that's been trending towards the Democrats. They had a ton of success there in the 2018 midterms, and of course Hillary Clinton won the state, giving that one as a likely over to Joe Biden. Going down to North Carolina, expected to be a true toss-up scenario. It was extremely close between Clinton and Trump, within around 3 or so percentage points back in 2016. I feel like Biden is able to do just enough better to where he'd be able to pick this one up in a very close race. Also likely to be a close Senate race in North Carolina in 2020 as well, but I feel like Biden would be able to pick that one up. And Georgia, out of all of the Democratic hopefuls, I feel like Biden has possibly the best chance at picking off Georgia. Clinton was actually relatively competitive with Trump, losing by around 5 or so percentage points. There's a strong African-American vote contingent that I think Biden could do very well in this state, obviously. And just among these southeastern states, Georgia is one that's kind of trending more towards being a toss-up. However, still Republican-leaning, and even though the statewide races can be close, they still, in general, are single-digit wins, whether it's between like 5 to 9 percentage points towards the Republicans. Now, that wasn't as much the case in 2018, where the governor's race, where it was extremely close between Kemp and Abrams, but the Republicans were still able to hold on to that one at the end of the day. I think it would be really close, maybe even within 1 or 2 percentage points, but still just going to give this one as a slight lean over to Donald Trump. And then Florida, kind of the same case that I made over in Arizona. There's a lot of older voters in this state, and I think that Biden can peel off enough of these older voters where it makes enough of a difference, where basically Florida is always within around 1 or so percentage points in these presidential results. I think Biden does enough to make it where the Democrats can reclaim this state. Obama had won it in the 2 prior election cycles in 2012 and 2008, and Biden being his VP on that ticket, that also I think has a potential carryover effect for him to have success in the state going towards 2020. And then we have those 2 competitive districts and New Hampshire. So I'll go up to New Hampshire. Trump's numbers are extremely terrible right now in terms of his approval disapproval in New Hampshire. He was extremely close with Clinton back in 2016, but I think Biden is a much stronger candidate in this particular state in his head-to-head against Trump, and I feel like that would be a likely one to continue to stay with the Democrats. And then the 2nd congressional district in Maine, as well as Nebraska. These are interesting results. So if we take a look at the entirety of Nebraska, a conservative leaning state, clearly, obviously, towards the Republicans statewide, but the 2nd congressional district can be very competitive. We saw in 2018 where a very progressive Democrat who didn't get all that much support from the Democratic establishment was still able to mount a campaign where she got to within a couple of percentage points against an incumbent Republican. In what's likely to be a pretty strong year in 2020 for the Democrats, I think that's enough to flip this district and get it to Biden. And we've seen Democrats have success in this particular district in the past. I think he'd be able to pick that one up. And then in Maine, we saw the Democrats pick this one up because of ranked choice voting in 2018. And I believe that we're going to have ranked choice voting in the presidential result as well in 2020. And if that is the case, I think that's enough to get this one to the Democrats as well. But we'll see if that is going to be the case or not. So that gives us a map in a situation where I feel like Biden, there's a case to be made that he has a pretty strong head-to-head against Donald Trump. We're seeing that in the polls. And there was a number of these states that Hillary Clinton was very close to Trump, where I think Biden has a bit more strength in the head-to-head, where it can flip just enough percentage points in these areas where it can make a big difference. Those being states like Arizona, Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. I think that those are really the key battleground states that people are going to look at going towards 2020, and I think this is where Biden could have a bit of success. So that's going to wrap this one up, guys. I appreciate you stopping by. Consider subscribing to my YouTube channel, and hope to see you guys back here for my next video.